right, so this is part 3 and the final part for the introduction to William Shakespeare and the Elizabethan theater. So this section will talk about sources for Romeo and Juliet. So there are many sources for Shakespeare's play, but you only need to know one. You need to know the most recent source, and that is a poem written by a man named Arthur Brooke, and the title of the poem is called The Tragical History of Romeo and Juliet, and it was written in 1564. Now, Romeo and Juliet was written in 1594, so this is the most recent source that Shakespeare used for his play. So interestingly about Shakespeare's plot lines is that they are not original. So when I talk about sources, that means I'm talking about where Shakespeare got his ideas for his plots. So if you recall, A Midsummer Night's Dream had 7 different sources. Romeo and Juliet has many different sources. Shakespeare added some of his own spice, some of his own twist to his version, but the story itself is actually very old. In fact, we can trace Romeo and Juliet back to Greek myth, because in Greek myth we find these motifs of love, death, resurrection, and death again. In Romeo and Juliet, we find these motifs of love, death, resurrection, and death again. So specifically, we look at 2 different Greek myths, the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, and the myth of Demeter and Persephone. So very simply, the story of Orpheus and Eurydice is this. They were 2 lovers who were married, but on their wedding day, Eurydice is bitten by this poisonous snake and she dies. Orpheus is heartbroken, so he travels to the underworld to plead with Hades and Persephone to let Eurydice live. They feel very sorry for him, and so they do let her live, but the catch is this. On their journey from the underworld to the upper world, Orpheus is not allowed to turn around and look at Eurydice. So the 2 are almost out of the underworld, almost to the upper world, and Orpheus, who's very anxious, turns around and glances at Eurydice, and she falls back to the underworld, never to be seen again. So you see in that story, there is love, there is death, there is almost resurrection, and there is death again. The story of Demeter and Persephone has the similar motifs. So Demeter is Persephone's mother, and she's crazy about her daughter. But Hades, god of the underworld, falls in love with Persephone. So he pretty much kidnaps her. He makes the earth open up underneath her and pulls her down to the underworld with him, and Demeter is heartbroken. So she pleads with Zeus for some sort of deal so that she can see Persephone again. Well, Persephone has actually fallen in love with Hades. So while she loves her mother, she loves Hades as well. So Zeus compromises, and he says that Persephone can spend half the year with Hades and half the year with Demeter. So the half the year that she's with Demeter, it is spring and summer, as Demeter is goddess of the natural world, and the half the year that she's with Hades, it is autumn and winter. So in that story, you can also see those same motifs of love, death, resurrection, and death again. So the story, if we fast forward a little bit to the 2nd century AD, morphs a little, and we have this work by Xenophon where you have these 2 teenagers who have a hidden or secret marriage. You have this second suitor who is in love with the girl. You have a story involving a death-like potion, and you have a tomb scene in the story. So let's fast forward again to 1476, and a story appears along those same lines as the 2nd century story, except this author adds a friar to secretly marry the lovers. The male hero is banished for a murder. The heroine's father chooses a husband for her. There's a sleeping potion, an entombment, a failed postal delivery, and both lovers die. So let's fast forward again to 1530, and we have a similar story, except the lovers have been renamed: Romeo Monteschi and Giulietta Capuletti. Shakespeare's characters are named Romeo Montague and Juliet Capulet. There's a friar in Deporto's story named Lorenzo. Shakespeare has a friar named Lawrence. Romeo has a friend in Deporto's story named Mercutio. Shakespeare has a friend of Romeo's named Mercutio. Deporto has a masked ball, a balcony scene, and there's a double suicide at Giulietta's tomb. So let's fast forward again to 1554, and we have a novel by a man who puts a nurse in the story, and that nurse plays a significant role. Shakespeare's nurse plays a significant role. Fast forward again to 1559, you have a version of the story where Romeo has an unrequited love, and there's the insertion of an apothecary who is a druggist. Shakespeare has kept both of those aspects in his story. Fast forward again to 1564, and you have Arthur Brooke's poem, Shakespeare's most recent source. In his story of these lovers, we have the introduction of a character named Benvolio, friend of Romeo's. Shakespeare keeps that. And we have an expanded role of the character Mercutio, another friend of Romeo's. Shakespeare keeps that as well. So nothing new under the sun. You can see how the story has evolved over the years, how Shakespeare has taken parts of the evolution and has used those parts himself, adding his own spice. In 1597, Romeo and Juliet is published. Now, the play was actually written in 1594, but published in 1597. And I'm now going to show you a trailer from the Romeo and Juliet play performed at the 1997 Globe Theatre.
Of Vitruvio. Plague among your houses, I expect. Before I shall die. Thus from my lips, by yours, my sin is purged.
Then have my lips the sin that they have took.
Sin from my lips, a trespass sweetly urged. Give me my sin again. Mistress, minion you, thank me no thankings, nor proud me no prouds, but fettle your fine joints against Thursday next, to go with Paris to St. Peter's Church, or I will drag thee on a hurdle thither. Out, you green sickness baggage, out, you tallow face! This day's black fate on more days than prevent. This but begins what other days must end.
Hope you enjoy reading Act 1.